Hello and a warm welcome to today's webinar. I will be putting your questions to our presenters in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So I do believe we might have just lost connection, so I'm just going to pause for a moment and reflect back on who we've got presenting this session. So joining me, my name is Susie West. I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and I'm your host for today. We've got Terry Balzanella from EXL Service. We've got Stephen DeDecker from Cargill, and we've got Cheyenne Mukherjee from the Everest Group. You do have a very important role to play, which is to make sure that you bring your questions to this session, please. We've got 10 minutes at the end of this session for your questions. Let's have a look at the context for this session today. So global business services as a concept has actually been around for quite some time. Early adopters are companies like Procter & Gamble and BP. They've actually been doing global business services, or at least applying the characteristics of what we now define as characteristics for global business services is quite some time. And what we're now finding is that there is a huge mobilization towards the adoption of global business services. And the question really is, what is global business services, and how is global business services as a construct, a delivery construct, different to multifunctional global shared services? What is the difference? And this is what we're really going to be examining. And I was very, very pleased about 3 months ago when EXL came to Shared Services Link and asked if we together, two parties, could run a study on what global business services actually were and how did they differ from shared services, and was the change worth it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased that today Terry Balzanella is going to be talking through the results of that study with you, and then we're going to be handing over to Stephen DeDecker from Cargill, who's going to be giving his perspective of what Cargill's doing with global business services, and then we're going to be passing over to Cheyenne from Everest, who's going to be sharing with us the analyst's perspective. So and now I'd like to hand over to Terry Balzanella. Over to you, please, Terry.
Thank you very much, Susie. As Susie outlined at the top of this webinar, EXL and Shared Services Link have conducted a study to understand how prevalent global business services is as a structural change to the way businesses operate, and if it's a growing trend. Additionally, we also want to share with you some of the experiences that EXL has seen in the market and our opinion as to how this will impact the world of consolidating services in the future. We posed the question, is the change worth it? Maybe the question we should be asking is, what will be the impact to our business of not changing? So firstly, to frame some of the study results. Geographically, over 50% of the respondents were Europe-based. However, it's worth emphasizing that these responses were typically from international businesses. From a maturity perspective, over 50% of the respondents have operated shared services for greater than 5 years, indicating a relatively mature outlook to shared services and the concept of global business services. When we look at the respondents' current operating model, we see that 13% claim currently to operate a global business service. If we take the view that the natural evolution of global business services is a migration from the global shared services model, then there is evidence that global business services will continue to expand as the preferred service delivery model in the future. By way of context, the functions that appear most commonly in the multifunctional shared services within the study were finance for 87%, followed by HR at 42%, and then IT and procurement at 36%. In addition, there were a wide range of other functions that have been captured under the multifunctional shared services banner, from the typical back office activities associated with shared services to more technical and less common activities such as legal and marketing. At this point, let me depart from the survey itself for a minute and share with you the view of EXL. EXL's opinion is that whilst global business services may have evolved out of shared services discipline, it is critical that in order for GBS to fully deliver its remit, that it looks beyond the evolution to re-engineering how it can deliver on its expanded remit. This requires the business to revisit its structure and to define the target operating model that best fits the business's objectives and redefine responsibilities. Therefore, in order for the GBS organization to be fit for purpose, it, firstly, must support the corporation's global strategic objectives. It must be agile to adapt to the ever-changing needs of the business. It must free up key business leaders and influencers to be focused on the business, adding value and driving positive change. It must take ownership of the back office activities across a wide range of disciplines. That is to say, expand its remit beyond just support of transactional-based activities into the higher value outcome-based activities that encompass the judgmental and decision support activities. By the very nature of the activities, that it must be both global in its remit and virtual in its delivery mechanisms. Frequently, businesses get hung up around whether the delivery should be captive, hybrid, or outsourced. Frankly, this is just a delivery mechanism, and the decision needs to be made around the target operating model that is defined. This target operating model needs to be defined with specific reference to the global strategic objectives. Within the industry sector, there will be impact, especially around the constraints that regulatory bodies place on what activities can be consolidated versus what needs to be handled in country or close to the decision makers. And fundamentally, it must meet the needs of the business on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, global business services is global in nature, multidisciplined, with an expanded remit within the shared services function, offering a true end-to-end cross-functional process view. Anyway, if we go back to the survey now, let us now understand how the respondents defined global business services. There are a number of themes here, but I believe 4 are very much central to a GBS offering, and let me highlight these. Higher value beyond transactional. The second, multifunctional. That's a global multifunctional architecture shared across functions with end-to-end process ownership. It's got to be global. It needs to leverage location, management, facilities, and expertise. And finally, it has to be integrated and mature, managing the processes end-to-end. Global business services represents a genuinely different way of governing the back office, with the dismantling of the functional silos and the move to processes being managed end-to-end, we see an increased opportunity to provide both greater operational efficiency and greater insight into the business's operations. As I mentioned earlier, additionally, this should free up key members of staff to have their primary focus on adding value to the business and creating positive change. At a high level then, the key differentiators between a shared service and global business services are transactional versus outcome-based. Secondly, global business services has a broader remit cutting across functions with end-to-end process responsibility. And lastly, GBS is perceived as a business partner as opposed to a service provider with greater influence on the business. Finally, when we look at the respondents' current operating model, 13% claim to be operating a GBS model, with 18% migrating to this model, and a further 27% in the process of evaluation. This would suggest that over 50% are considering or are already on the journey towards a global business services operating model. From a regional perspective, Europe accounts for over half of the respondents that are migrating or in the process of evaluating global business services as an alternative. Although, as I previously mentioned earlier, we need to look at this as a global and not regional delivery concept. We have taken the responses from both those running a GBS-style service and compared them to the respondents who are currently operating a shared service function. And from a high-level strategic objective, both structures share three common priorities. Firstly, process improvement. Secondly, cost reduction. And third, improved service quality. However, when we look at the four key areas that differ, these really highlight the importance of the global business service mandate. So at number 4, global business structures are more likely to adopt a hybrid model, bringing together the best of insourcing and third-party capabilities and take advantage of their tools and technologies. Very much a partnership. At number 3, we discovered that GBS organizations have a more customer-focused approach. From the survey alone, we see that 83% of global business services organizations see themselves as having a total customer focus versus only 64% for shared services. Secondly, GBS functions have moved up the value chain, delivering higher value functions. The factors around this are, this is service against process. It's sponsorship at the top table, and it's multifunctional. And finally, when we look at certain characteristics of GBS versus shared services, we see some striking contrast in terms of focus, influence, and remit across the business. What this illustrates is an advisory and consultative approach that supports decisions across multiple functions. There is also a wide gulf between what shared services and GBS offer in terms of greater value of benefits to the business. So let us understand the journey that a business takes to move from global shared services to global business services. There are 6 steps that are common in this journey. Firstly, incorporate higher value, more complex functions, moving away from transactional to multifunctional processes. Secondly, develop and inspire a service culture with the drivers of continuous added value and efficiency. Thirdly, Leverage technology to gain greater insight across the functions, avoiding the silo-based wisdom, adding value to the service that they offer the business. Gain the board level leadership and support to drive investment and support the expanded remit. There is no one size fits all. When it comes to structure, leverage the best that both your internal and third-party organizations can offer. And finally, perception. Be seen as an equal partner to the business and not just as a service provider. These are the 6 principles or building blocks that you need to successfully create the global business service solution, moving from shared services to global business services. So, in conclusion, we asked at the outset, is the GBS model worth the effort? Looking at the study and comparing the benefits of both shared services and global business services, then the answer is yes. Perhaps the question should be, what is the competitive advantage my business is losing by not following this path? And at this juncture, I'm going to hand over to Stephen De Decker, who is the Global Business Services Manager for Europe for Cargill. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Terry. And indeed, Cargill is one of those companies, one of the many companies who really embarked on the transformation journey from an FSC to a GBS organization. My intent for today is not really to give a theoretical presentation or a study book example on how you should transform your organization from an FSC to a GBS, but my intent is really to show and to share some of our experiences in a humble and down-to-earth way. What does the GBS journey look like for Cargill? What are the pitfalls and how did we overcome some of those struggles? In other words, what does GBS organization really means for Cargill? But before we do that, maybe we should first ask the question, as you see on the screen, who is Cargill? And when you hear the name of Cargill, you might think we're heavily involved in agriculture industry. And you will be right. But you might be surprised by how large our reach truly is. We are a very diverse company with more than 70 different business units. We reach millions of people with our products and services every day, from fruit ingredients to prepared foods to energy, financial services and agriculture inputs. We really help nourish the world. And let the numbers speak for its own. Cargill reaches the tables of more than 400 million people each year by making animal feed. And we load and discharge bulk goods in more than 6,000 ports around the world. And also good to know, Cargill malt delivers for breweries in 43 different countries across 5 different continents. We really connect the farthest reach of the globe, which brings us as a company and a GBS organization and raises to the first challenge. How should shared services and how should the shared service activities be organized to align with such a diverse world of Cargill? As you can see, in addition, our reach is global. Our strength as a company is our ability to connect expertise around the world. We are present in more than 65 different countries and have more than 140,000 employees worldwide who speak more than 60 different languages. And this will bring us to the second challenge. What should our regional or global footprint look like to serve our customers with the right quality and in the appropriate language? What does right and appropriate really mean? The other thing we're very proud of in Cargill is our high caliber of people. Cargill is full of exceptional people and it is truly a pleasure to work with some of the best in the fields. When we talk about fields, we talk often about sales, trading, production, and innovation. Which brings us to the next question on setting up a GBS or a shared service organization. Do we use the same high bar do we demand the same high caliber of talent in a shared service for transactional processes as we do for the other functions? To answer all those questions, Cargill Europe started a journey, a shared service journey. As you can see, our journey started in the 1990s with simple processes like accounts receivable and accounts payable were transformed and moved to financial services which were established in specific countries. And actually creating those centers was facilitated by the fact that we also were on a journey to implement GD Edwards software for finances. So the rollout of GD Edwards went together with the rollout of a shared service. Around the early 2000s, we wanted to leverage more of the economies of scale, and we saw the need for creating more regional FACs, still for the same simple accounts receivable and accounts payable transactions, but this time more centralized. As a result, the number of FACs in Western Europe got reduced to main hubs, mainly in the UK, the Netherlands, and Spain. This process of internal consolidation continued through 2009. In addition, we started to outsource some of the financial transaction processes in conjunction with our partner to Bulgaria to take advantage of our labor arbitrage. Those days were all about standardization, simplification, and centralization. That changed around 2011. We started to review our shared service strategy again, and we established for the first time a GBS organization. We not only focused on the G from global, what would our global footprint look like, but we also started to focus on the B from businesses, looking at processes not so much as transactional processes, but really looking at processes end to end. So the process became actually a business enabler. Around 2013, and still continue, the journey is not finished, we started to fine-tune and implement those GBS strategies. As you can see, the scopes of the shared services was enlarged to really 5 functions, the 5 functions Terry was talking about: finance, purchasing, IT, logistics, and HR. We continue to work on our global footprint as well as taking advantage of the labor arbitrage, and this time also India got into the loop via our outsourced partners. As this slide illustrates, the shared service concept is almost like a rolling snowball. As you can see, as time goes on, it starts rolling faster, scopes becomes bigger, and so far there is still no sign that it will stop. The GBS journey for Cargill definitely will continue. But how do we go from a shared service organization to a GBS organization? What are the biggest differentiators? And to us, to be successful, the first differentiator is really to have representation from the top. Stakeholder management is key important. And key corporate center members needs to be on an advocacy level. It is not enough that they support as long as it's not in their business. No, they really need to support, and they need to be advocates. They need to see the advantages of a GBS organization, and that means for our GBS organization a lot of trips to shared service centers and a lot of education. It is also for us very important to create a formal governance model, not only for the operations but also for the transitions, and to put a RASCI model in place, clearly define what are the roles and the responsibilities. A GBS organization should get away from only the influencing and really actually should have quite a lot of decision rights. For example, if processes are outsourced or not should really be a decision of a GBS organization, not from the BU. A second success factor of moving from a shared service organization to a GBS organization is really all about the footprint. Not only a regional but also global footprint, to really enable economies of scale and scope and labor arbitrage. Because in the older days, decision rights would often lie within the BUs and the functions, and in Cargill that wasn't different. You end up with shared services scattered all around the region, which is obviously not that efficient. So therefore, building a global footprint is key importance. Secondly, the right footprint might also mean creating partnership with outsourced partners. When you establish your footprint, the question you might ask yourself is, do you really want to be in a business of transactional processes? And obviously, an outsourced partner can be very effective and efficient in not only executing the transactional processes, but also optimizing labor arbitrage through their global footprint. The third factor that differentiates a GBS organization from an FSC organization is definitely to think and act like a BU, to be a business partner, and quality is key. If you would ask a business unit or a company what success would look like, probably the answer you will get is creating shareholders' value, which is nothing more than creating quality, innovative, added value products at the lowest cost. And why should a GBS organization be different? Creating value is really the message for a business GBS organization. This is really how a GBS organization can differentiate itself from an FSC organization. There are two levels on which this can be true. First level is an operational level, and the second is a transitional level. In the operational level, it's all about being world-class and constantly benchmark against peers and the market, but also being integrated more with other functions, for example, the purchasing department. When a purchasing department negotiates better payment terms with its suppliers, that's fantastic. But how do you ensure that those new payment terms are also really flawlessly respected by the suppliers? And that's where a GBS organization can help. This is where we can create value, and this is where we are creating value. Also, value can be created by more supporting analytics, tasks, and knowledge management. And the fourth point where we often neglected, where we can add a lot of value, is compliance, reconciliations. On the transitional side, where the GBS organization can bring value is on mergers and acquisition. We can be scalable and quick integrators, and we can have a global template on how to transitions, create expertise in PMO capabilities. But it's not enough to think and act like a BU. Respected and to be recognized as a BU is as much as important. To do so, attracting talent is a key component for a good branding strategy. But also important, and besides reality and KPIs and SLAs and facts and figures, it's really also all about managing the perceptions and doing customer surveys to really understand what those perceptions are. But as previously mentioned, a transition from an FSC to a GBS organization is a mindset shift. And changes mean struggles. And struggles means that we need to overcome. And for Cargill, that's not different. Our journey has and had its fair share of struggles. So what are those things that helped us to overcome some of those struggles and some of those challenges in our journey? To make the journey, it's important to create momentum. Number one, create momentum. Find your supporters. And one way of doing that is to creating a soft or a hard mandate, if possible, and I don't like the word mandate so much. But the way that we've done it and the way that it worked for us is that we actually had a new CFO. And the tone on the top is really key. That created the momentum. Obviously, when you create momentum, the GBS organization needs to deliver. And the second part is really speed. Speed is crucial. Don't reinvent the wheel, but leverage third party. So find a party also which is seemingly and can seemingly integrate with your company culture. We found our partner in EXL. But also find a partner which is pragmatic and is execution driven. Think about the same partner for transactions and execution at the same time to have that full responsibility. Obviously also think about a partner or a BPO for labor arbitrage and scalability. So leverage as much as possible a third party. And then as mentioned before, and this is the most difficult one, get recognized as a BU and get respected. In Europe, we continue to select talent, but strategic talent, talent which is respected within the BUs to build up our expertise. Also, we're still working on our S of the GBS and being a more salesperson, deliver services, and drive value-added tasks instead of being on the receiving side. Therefore, we reach out more to other functions, as the purchasing department, as previously mentioned. And lastly, on getting respected, make sure you have one standard common approach, a global approach. Think local, global approach with appropriate localizations. The fourth component to overcome some of the struggles of the journey of GBS is obviously communication. Communication, communication, and once more communication. Over-communication with the consistent methods, but also former stakeholder management. And, as mentioned before, also education. What's in it for us? So all this really led for us to an extra cost reduction of 35% over the last 5 years. But also important is really that it allowed to be used to focus on their core activities. Fiduciary role and value-added role, the roles of selling, innovation, and manufacturing, and leave the transactional pieces over to the GBS organization. So this is the Cargill GBS story, a story which undoubtedly will continue. With this, I would like to hand over to Cheyenne from the Everest Group. Over to you, Cheyenne.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, my name is Cheyenne Mukherjee, and I'm a practice director at Everest Group. I manage the firm's global business services research practice. The global business services model is not a new phenomenon. In fact, the GBS model comprises over a fifth of the 120 billion plus global services market in terms of revenues. The remaining share is in the pure outsourced model. Note the global services market is defined as what is services that are served from nearshore, offshore, and onshore locations globally. As we look at the data, and we found that comparing and contrasting between the shares of service providers and the GBS model between 2008 and 2012, we found in fact that contrary to popular perception, both models continue to grow. There was some noise in the market that the GBS model wasn't sustainable, as many firms were hiving off their captives. But in fact, we find that while there is a slight decrease in the headcount share of the GBS, in fact, in terms of total revenue, the share is remaining consistent. What this points towards is that there's a shift towards the mix of work that is delivered out of the GBS. And what we find is that there is more complex or judgment-intensive work that the GBSs are delivering for the parent organization. Now, the GBS model is delivering multiple forms of value adds to the parent organization beyond the obvious cost savings. What we find is that the most common forms of value adds beyond cost savings, beyond unit cost savings, are efficiency and effectiveness. But what we also find is some of the more mature adopters of the GBS model, in fact, see two-pronged benefits, one being revenue impact and the other being enhancement of capabilities. in revenue impact, we see speed to market for new products or entry for new markets being one of the benefits that the GBS has served its parent companies, and the other being able to deliver an enhanced and a consistent customer experience, be it the internal customers or external market customers. And in terms of capabilities, we find GBS model being able to access and build and grow a talent model for the company. And whether this is strategic talent or very niche talent, it's a ground to breed and foster talent and nurture it. It's also a template for globalization. Many European and US firms have in fact used the GBS model to adopt globalization. Now, today I'd like to share 3 case studies from our work and my vantage point that I find might talk about each of these forms of impact. The first being the retailer, a leading retailer using a GBS model to drive effectiveness in store design. What this GBS was doing for the retailer was that it built a global organization that could that built deep domain expertise in retail store designing and could conduct decision analytics. What moved the needle for this firm was the global process ownership was actually transferred to the GBS, and the GBS had strong alignment with parent stakeholders. As a result, it could deliver a superior experience to the customers and also effectiveness in the way it designed its stores. The second example I'd like to take is of a global engineering firm. The global engineering firm used the GBS to drive competitive advantage for itself, and this was the nerve center of innovation. The GBS was a distributed group of internal and service provider organization that innovated new products and new technology and helped the parent company enter new markets in Asia. What was important to note that the GBS strategy was completely aligned with the parent, and the CEO in fact took note of what was happening in the GBS organization and incented it to foster innovation. Finally, the third example is of a global insurance major. This insurance company set up a global talent model based on a GBS construct, which utilized a mix of nearshore and onshore resources across the world to fill pockets of gaps in talent. So the nearshore organization and the offshore organization brought complementary skill sets to the table that helped the company develop deep business context and domain expertise in the insurance space. And the GBS had an executive mandate and had enjoyed strong relationship with the parent. The combination of these gave the company access to pockets of strength and skills that are niche or scarce, and also was a template of globalization. So the question is there a roadmap for companies or shared services to transform themselves and achieve value beyond cost savings using the GBS model? Yes, there is. And we find that a combination of market forces and changing business expectations have actually led GBSs to evolve beyond delivery. Now, when we see the GBS evolution, we see a 3-step process. Largely, most companies have a 3-step journey from being a provider to a strategic entity. And this could take anything from 8 to 15 years. Some companies have even achieved it in less than 8 years. So what are these 3 steps and how do they impact value? So the first is of a shared services provider, which largely is a function-centric or a country-specific focus, is delivering largely cost impact, establishing some of the base case scenario, delivering on the cost and service level expectations, and gradually expanding the scope of services. This takes typically around 3 to 5 years. As the company tries to then transform into more of an integrated multifunction portfolio organization delivering global business services, it takes the shape of an internal business partner. So what are the key characteristics of an internal business partner and how long does it take? So the characteristics are that the internal business partner has a seat at the table. It has a seat at the CIO or CFO leadership table. It moves from delivering cost impact to business impact and has a strong value orientation. In fact, it wants to articulate the value that it delivers to its parent organization. It also proactively manages its growth direction. So it just it moves from being an order taker or a task taker to shaping the demand. And finally, it becomes a more customer-centric organization that is more vertically aligned from being a more horizontally aligned, process-driven organization. And then, after around 8 years, we find that there are some GBSs that have, in fact, moved the needle even further, and they are being able to reimagine the global services delivery. So they start architecting the company's global services business platform. And in order to do that, they depict characteristics which are beyond just delivery of services or driving business impact, but they start influencing the top line of companies. Now, in order to do that, there's a strong pull that they create within the organization through a differentiated brand, and is regarded as a BU, as one of my co-panelists mentioned. There's a strong end-to-end ownership of processes and a focus on outcomes. We find companies establishing global centers of excellence, whether it's quality, transition, sourcing, and importantly, it starts delivering innovation globally and impacting the profit of the company. So when we looked at what does it take for a GBS to actually transform itself into a next generation global business services entity, we found there were 4 broad principles. Easy said and done, but let me start breaking them up one by one. The first is create pull and conduct proactive demand management. So GBSs are able to drive adoption of global sourcing within the BUs of the parent organization. So they become global sourcing advisors and play a more consultative role as they shape demand. The GBS has a leadership seat at the table and in fact is able to influence global sourcing decisions both at the deal and the portfolio level. The extent of ownership is another key area that we found very interesting. We found companies were able to not only drive more complex work out of the GBS model, but were also able to have a greater presence and a stronger control on processes, to the extent that the global process owner concept and some of these global process owners were being able to be based out of the GBS, and these global process owners could be anywhere in the world. They could be sitting in South Africa, India, Malaysia, United States, wherever. And importantly, they also established, by doing so, a global center of excellence. So they codified all the tribal knowledge gained through years of transitions into a transition COE, or were able to become the global design and the COE for compliance, for example. The third would be leadership mandate. So this is an example of a mature adopter of global services where 1/3 of its global leadership is actually present in the global GBS organization. There is incentivization of movement of global talent between the parent and the global organization. And also the responsibility of the GBS extends beyond just regions or just a country. In fact, leadership is given global mandate to drive global business services. And finally, importantly, leverage of third parties. We find that the smarter users of global business services, in fact, have worked collaboratively with third parties, being able to use them in a complementary basis, not just compete. Both tactically and strategically, keeping the parent's objectives in mind. Another key driver of competitiveness was the service management and the vendor management capabilities at the GBS. So when we looked at collaboration and what's the state of the collaboration, we found the state of the current collaboration is actually more tactical. And what we found is global strategic collaboration with vendors is what some of the leading adopters of GBS have done to benefit from third parties. So largely it has moved from staff augmentation to function-wise sourcing in F&A procurement to more strategic sourcing, and those are through multiple constructs, whether it's multi-year outsourcing deals on a very specific tower, or service providers providing assisted captives or DOT solutions to the global business service organizations. In terms of what will it take to implement the change for GBS to step up, we found three key areas of focus. One is having a very deliberate views on capabilities to be leveraged from third parties versus internal organizations across the service portfolio. Second is having a forward-looking view on the demand structuring and having integrated planning with vendors to provide visibility and incent the right behavior from vendors. And finally, enhance the governance and the strategic vendor management capability in a distributed environment so as to create a global services management COE. So at this point, this provides a good segue for me to hand over the baton to Terry. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Cheyenne. At this stage, I really just wanted to summarize some of the points that have been raised, and then I'll be handing back to Susie to conduct the Q&A. So in Stephen's presentation, he raised a number of interesting items around the Cargill experience, and I just wanted to highlight a handful of those. And I think the first one that comes out is the need to attract talent into your global business services operation. It's very critical that the level of mandate is reflected by the level of capability and talent that you have within your organization. Second point is partnership. It's absolutely critical you have the right partner, but you leverage the best of your internal partnerships and your external partnerships. I think the third point was customer focus, the need to have that customer focus. Those internal customers are stakeholders. You need to ensure you have their buy-in, that you gain their respect, and that you constantly communicate with them. Innovation. You can't afford to stand still. You need to constantly innovate. And then lastly, be a decision maker, not just an influencer. And with Cheyenne, he raised a number of interesting points as well. He highlighted that global business services is not new, but it's a growing, evolving theme within the shared services environment. The fact that, as we've all indicated, we're seeing more and more businesses moving up the value chain to the higher value, more complex activities that are being consolidated. A couple of points which were raised by Cheyenne, which I think are interesting. First of all, the flexibility and speed that this brings to your organization's ability to react. And then secondly, the globalization of resources and consolidation. So if we just step back now and look at what we've learned from both the survey and the Cargill experience, and then the overview of the analysts from Everett, I think there are a number of common themes. It's absolutely critical to have that stakeholder engagement and executive sponsorship. In terms of remit, the GBS must be aligned with the business strategic objectives. Ownership of end-to-end processes across functions delivering greater efficiency and insight is a must for GBS. The move from shared services to global business services is a journey that needs to be navigated. And again, just to emphasize those 6 steps from shared services to GBS that we highlighted at the end of the study, it's the move to higher value functions. Its culture, service and delivery must become paramount. It's the use of tools and technology, leveraging the best that internal and third party can offer you. Structure, leveraging the model to give you an effective structure geographically. There's no reason why it can't be a virtual structure. Leadership, again, As we said earlier, stakeholder engagement and executive sponsorship are an absolute must. And then perception. To use the point that Stephen made during his presentation, communicate, 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 but more importantly, get it right. So the incremental benefits of taking the journey to GBS as we see it are embracing a hybrid model, taking advantage of those third-party tools and technology. It's moving the focus to being a total customer service focus. It's moving up the value chain, offering greater value functions consolidated into a GBS. And then it's highlighted by the disparity gap between the remits of the shared services and GBS. As we said earlier, it's about adding that advisory and consultative approach that supports decisions across multiple functions that ultimately drives a greater value of benefit. At this point, I'd like to hand back to Susie. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Terry. So now's your chance, please, to pop through your questions. We've already got a number of them, so do make sure you do stay on the line and do put your questions to the panel. I'll put this question to, I think, to Stephen at Cargill. A question that we've got from a viewer is, how are language requirements addressed within the GBS model?
That's a very good question, and so that question comes back to what is your optimal footprint. So it is, and that's one of the local kind of characteristics. So some of the transactions and some of the activities needs language requirements, some of them don't. And it's really crucial to identify which one do and which one don't. For those who do need language skills, we would outsource regionally, and just to make sure that we have those language skills within our footprint or in a regional footprint. That could be outsourced or that could be captive, but really regionally. So those who don't need the language skills, most of those activities could be done everywhere in the world, and so those we would most likely do somewhere else. So it really depends on identifying the language skills where the activity will be taking place.
Thank you, Stephen. We've got a lot of questions. Keep your questions coming through, please. We've got a lot of questions coming in on cultural differences. So it's more of a shared services question for you, please, Stephen, again. But this particular viewer, she's asking, did you ever experience huge opposition from the local business units against transferring activities to shared services, especially high-level processes? For this particular viewer in particular, it has been a problem that even though they have theoretical support from HQ, local business units are almost in the way of stopping the application of a global model, and apparently some excuses are language, cultural differences, etc. She's asking, how did you make it so easy at your end?
Well, first of all, it is not easy, and so there are two aspects on the question. So one aspect is really the change management, and change management is key for the whole transition. It is not an easy process, and because the BUs are giving control away, obviously that's difficult, and there the change management and the stakeholder and the mandate or the tone of the talk is extremely important. It is not an easy exercise. The second part of the question is really about cultural differences, and yes, there are some cultural differences. So it really depends on what kind of activities. You need to be very careful on where you put those activities. So for example, if you have activities where the outsourcing partner or the captive center or the shared service center are talking with your customers, that's a different approach, or should be a different approach than when you apply CAS. So really, depending on what the communication skills would be, we put it in a different location.
Okay, thank you. Also, how, again, drawing on the subject of culture, so I think I'll throw this open to you, Terry. how do you recommend addressing the common cultural differences, particularly when a global business center service center is potentially offshored, even if it's run in-house rather than outsourced?
I think there are a number of guidelines we can give you, and I think Stephen touched upon a couple of them during his presentation. So I'm going to leverage off of that. I think one of the big items that will help overcome the cultural differences is getting it right. So being really focused on the change management, on getting your communication plan in place so you are constantly communicating with all the stakeholders. And then as the transaction moves through the various steps, making sure that you absolutely are focusing on any risks or challenges and overcoming them, such that when you finally go live, you have as close as you can have to an orderly transition of activity to an offshore location.
Okay, Cheyenne, would you like to add anything to that, please?
Well, I think my co-panelists have covered this quite well. Thanks.
Okay, let's move on. We've got a question around global process ownership. What is the role of global process ownership? Well, actually, the question is, what makes the role of global process owner work effectively? The risk is that they don't have real authority. And I suppose as well, what is the changing role of global process owners within this change of delivery construct? And then I'll put that question to Terry, please.
Okay, yeah. So I think there's a couple of points in there. So if I can just try to maybe articulate as I saw the question, global business ownership, and what should be their remit, and then secondly, how does that fit into the new GBS model? Well, I think they're complementary. I think that it goes back to the importance of cutting across functions and really understanding the impact of process end to end. We've all got examples where we fix something within a process within our own little silo, and all that's done is created a problem up or downstream. And I think the job of the global process owner is to have that wider mandate to make sure that the changes that are made to process are fit for purpose. Looking at it in terms of global business services, I think all this does is it brings into the focus the need for global business ownership and the importance that this brings to the business in terms of competitive advantage. So actually I see them as being complementary. I actually see that the global business owner very much dovetails into the global business services structure as it's being portrayed here.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Again, I'll put this one to you, please, Terry. Does the size of an organization determine the readiness to move up from a shared services organization to a GBS? In this particular case, this viewer has 80 members in their finance shared services team, and it's a $3 billion turnover company. Can a company with that profile aspire to have a GBS model?
I guess the question is size important? And at the risk of a cheap joke, in this case, no, it's not, I don't think. I think it's actually more to do with what is the business's strategic objectives, what's it trying to achieve, and what benefits is it going to see from the consolidation into a global business service in terms of competitive advantage, in terms of economies of scale. I think you have to look at it in a very holistic way. You can't look at it just in terms of numbers. So I think in the context of the question, no, I don't think size in this case is important. I think it's much more important to look at what are the business's objectives and what is the complexity and advantage that this will give us.
Okay, and centres of excellence, I'll put this one to Terry as well, if I may. Centres of excellence and program management offices are typically as far as this viewer is seeing, is typically a corporate HQ function. Why would you want those functions integrated into a transactional environment, or move a shared services organization away from transactional and into an innovative environment? Why? What's the case there?
Well, I think there's a few points in that. I think the first point I would make is the fact that it's in a head office function, I think is a moot point. I think the issue that we've made all the way through this is that you need to leverage the structure of your organization. In the world we live in today, most of what we do can be done in a virtual environment. That is to say, it's not office or country or dependent, and therefore can be done anywhere around the globe. I think the second thing is that the reason people are moving up the value chain is actually slightly more fundamental, and I think you need to turn the question on its head. What is it that you're going to actually empower the team that remains with the business to do that it's not able to do today? And I think that's really the way I would look at the question. I think what global business services does is it allows us to drive the right behavior within our businesses by having our key people focused on the business and not on process. So I think that's how I would look at it.
Terry, Cheyenne and Stephen from Cargill, thank you very much indeed for all of your input. We are out of time. We will be sending out the infographic to you in the next few working days, so make sure you look out for that. You will be the first recipients of the infographic. And you've got Terry's contact information there if you would like to contact him. Do check out the EXL's new website. They've revamped it in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and it's well worth a look. And also remember to join us next time for our coming up series of webinars for you. And also we've got a number of events coming up in the calendar which I urge you to register for, as a couple of them are nearly sold out. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and attention today. I look forward to welcoming you next time. Goodbye.